Italy is one of those countries that seems to have come straight out of an art book. It is shaped like an elegant boot stuck in southern Europe, has over 60 million inhabitants, and a cultural influence that spans centuries and borders. It is the birthplace of the Roman Empire, the Renaissance, opera, pizza, and the Vespa. It is home to cities that have become symbols of beauty, such as Rome, Venice, and Florence. Those who see it from the outside imagine a sunny, passionate country full of poetry and good wine. But not everything there is sunshine. What many people don't know is that behind this charm lies an Italy marked by deep scars, a country where the glitz of the north contrasts with the neglect of the south, where the wealth of museums hides growing inequality, where the history of imperial glories shares space with the shadow of fascism, the Mafia, poverty, and corruption. The truth is that Italy has two faces, one you already know from photos and travel memories, and another that rarely appears in tourist guides. And it is this other side that Bello Mundo takes you to discover today. Number 1. Italian history. The dark side of Italy did not begin recently. It comes from afar, embedded in the country's own history. In the 20th century, the world saw the birth of one of the most authoritarian regimes in modern Europe: fascism. Under the command of Benito Mussolini, between 1922 and 1943, the country plunged into censorship, persecution, and violence. The alliance with the Nazi regime during World War II only deepened the trauma, leaving thousands dead and entire cities in ruins. And even after the war, peace was slow to come. Between the 70s and 80s, Italy experienced the so-called Years of Lead, marked by attacks, kidnappings, and political assassinations by both the extreme right and the extreme left. It was a country at war with itself. But the dark side of Italian history is also present in places that look like something out of a horror movie, like Poveglia Island near Venice. In the 18th century, it became a quarantine zone for patients with bubonic plague. More than 100,000 people died there, isolated and without help. In the 20th century, it functioned as a psychiatric hospital, surrounded by reports of mistreatment, abuse, and even cruel experiments. In fact, we've already talked about this here on the channel. After this video, search for "No one could believe what happened on this island in Italy" to understand how shocking the patients' lives were. These episodes are not a thing of the past. They help us understand the fractured terrain where Italy's problems continue to unfold today. Number 2. Social inequality and poverty. Italy may be part of the G7, have historic cities, and be one of the most coveted tourist destinations in the world. But this image hides an open wound: social inequality between the north and south of the country. While the north is home to industrial centers such as Milan and Turin, with strong economies, good jobs, and cutting-edge infrastructure, the south, known as the Mezzogiorno, suffers from structural poverty, high unemployment, and poor services. It is as if there were two Italias within the same border. Recent data show that almost a quarter of the Italian population is at risk of poverty or social exclusion. In the south, the situation is even more serious. About 4 out of 10 people live in this vulnerable situation. In other words, almost half of the inhabitants of Calabria, Sicily, or Puglia cannot even guarantee the basics. This disparity is not new. It dates back centuries and has even been given a name: the Southern Question. Governments have been trying to solve the problem for decades, but the results remain modest. While one part of the country lives in European comfort, another part still faces living conditions similar to those in the poorest regions of Europe. And it is precisely in this fragile south that many of Italy's other problems find fertile ground, as we will see below. Number 3. Corruption and mismanagement. When corruption scandals make headlines so often, it is a sign that the problem has gone too far. And in Italian politics, that line was crossed long ago. In the 90s, an investigation called Mani Pulite, meaning clean hands, turned the country upside down. Politicians, business people, judges, a huge network of kickbacks, favors, and overpriced contracts. The scandal was so big that it brought down entire parties and practically buried the political system of the time. However, contrary to expectations, things did not improve that much. Mistrust continued. According to European Union data, Italy is still among the countries with the highest perception of corruption in the bloc. And this is not restricted to the central government. Corruption appears behind the scenes in Rome, yes, but also in small town halls, regional councils, and public offices throughout the country. The worst part is that all of this has a direct impact on people's lives. Misappropriated funds mean hospitals falling apart, schools without infrastructure, roads that are never finished, and in the end, people get used to delays, to slowness, to promises that are never kept. Mismanagement has become part of the landscape, and corruption is a shadow that insists on returning, election after election. And since we're talking about corruption, there's no way to ignore those who profit most from it: the Mafia. Number 4. Mafia and organized crime. It may seem like something out of a movie. If you've seen The Godfather, Goodfellas, Scarface, or even The Sopranos, you know what we're talking about. The Italian Mafia has become the main character in dozens of films, books, and series, always surrounded by glamour, codes of honor, and catchphrases. But real life is far from romantic. Organized crime in Italy is real, and much more deeply rooted than most people imagine. The word mafia was born there in Sicily and ended up becoming synonymous with criminal organizations around the world. However, in Italy, it has a name, a surname, and a territory. There are at least 5 main groups: the Cosa Nostra in Sicily, the Camorra in Naples, the 'Ndrangheta in Calabria, the Stida, also Sicilian, and the Sacra Corona Unita in the Apulia region. Each controls billion-dollar illegal businesses: drug trafficking, extortion, money laundering, smuggling, and even infiltration of public contracts. And anyone who thinks that this is all done on the quiet is mistaken. In many cities, especially in the South, everyone knows who is in charge. Shopkeepers pay protection money, politicians turn a blind eye, and many people live under threat. The 'Ndrangheta, for example, is now considered one of the most powerful organizations in Europe. It operates in at least 40 countries and moves billions of euros a year, all illegally. The Camorra, on the other hand, is famous for dominating entire neighborhoods in Naples, where the police often don't even enter. Despite police operations and occasional arrests, the Mafia remains strong because it does not hide. It adapts. It infiltrates the state, businesses, banks, and blends into the formal economy as if it were part of it. It is a parallel power that does not appear on maps, but dictates rules in much of the country. Number 5. Unemployment, young people, and brain drain. The lack of job opportunities, especially for young people, is another worrying aspect. Even before graduating, many young Italians already know what awaits them: difficulty finding jobs, low wages, and a closed job market. The unemployment rate among those aged between 15 and 24 remains high, hovering around 20%, even with a slight improvement in the overall rate, which fell to around 6%, the lowest level in 18 years. The reality is harsh, especially for those who have just left university. Jobs are scarce, temporary, and often poorly paid. The result? a veritable silent exodus. More than 1 million Italians under the age of 35 have left the country in the last decade in search of a more dignified future. This movement does not only involve the most qualified. Young people from all social classes and levels of education are leaving. Germany, the United Kingdom, France, and even destinations outside Europe have become refugees for those who just want to work and live with dignity. The imbalance is clear. For every young foreigner who moves to Italy, 9 Italians do the opposite, and many of those who leave do not return. Surveys show that more than half consider themselves to have a high standard of living in their new homes. Meanwhile, those who stay are faced with frustration, stagnation, and a labor market that is not very meritocratic. The country loses innovation, productivity, and vitality. It is a subtle dark side without the drama of other problems, but equally destructive in the long run. Number 6. Prejudice, machismo, and discrimination. In a country known for its elegance, art, and fashion, it is easy to imagine a progressive and welcoming society. But the reality is harsher. Prejudice is still present at many levels of Italian life. Racism and xenophobia have been on the rise in recent years, especially with the arrival of immigrants and refugees from Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Cases of assault, public humiliation, and acts of intimidation by far-right groups are not uncommon. There are neo-fascist groups that operate in broad daylight, attacking those they consider non-Italian, including in soccer stadiums and busy streets. Worse still, prejudice often comes from the top. Former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, for example, once referred to Barack Obama as young, handsome, and tanned in an openly racist tone. He also defended laws that allowed undocumented immigrants to be detained for up to 4 years, fueling xenophobic rhetoric. But it doesn't stop there. Structural sexism is also strong. Female participation in leadership positions is low, and sexist jokes made by politicians are still seen as harmless fun. Berlusconi himself even suggested that an unemployed woman should solve her problems by marrying a millionaire. The LGBTQ+ community also faces limitations. Civil unions are legal, but same-sex marriage is not allowed, and the current government opposes rights such as adoption and registration of children of same-sex couples. Despite the struggle of NGOs, feminists, and anti-fascist movements, intolerance remains alive. It is a dark side of modern Italy, revealing social wounds that are still far from healing. Number 7. Migration crisis and xenophobia. Italy has been one of the main gateways for migrants trying to reach Europe, mainly from Africa and the Middle East. Many risk everything on precarious crossings across the Mediterranean, fleeing war, hunger, and persecution. And when they arrive, they face another kind of battle: prejudice. In recent years, the southern Italian coast, especially regions such as Sicily and Calabria, has become the scene of humanitarian crises. Overcrowded boats, shipwrecks, saturated reception centers. The images have been seen around the world, but not always with empathy. Instead of compassion, what has grown is hostility. Inflammatory political rhetoric has linked migrants to crime, unemployment, and even cultural collapse. Radical leaders have promised to close ports and tighten immigration laws. And prejudice, it seems, is not confined to the past and former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi. The current Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, went so far as to declare that she would not allow Italy to become a refugee camp. Her words spread around the world and reinforced an exclusionary rhetoric that was already gaining momentum. This stance fuels xenophobia on the streets. Cases of aggression against Africans and Muslims have increased, as have demonstrations by neo-fascist groups. immigrants report humiliation at work, difficulty renting property, and exclusion from the healthcare system. Even in tourist cities, those who are different are not always welcome. For many Italians, the foreign presence is still seen as a threat, not as diversity. Meanwhile, humanitarian organizations struggle to ensure a minimum level of dignity for those who arrive. But social and political resistance shows that in Italy, the migration crisis is not just a question of borders, it is also a mirror of the intolerance that still persists. Number 8. Polarization and extremism in politics. Speaking of radical groups, if there is one specter that has returned to haunt Italian politics, it is radicalism. In the most recent elections, a coalition formed by parties such as the Brothers of Italy and the League came to power with a nationalist discourse, harsh on immigrants and focused on the restoration of traditional values. Nothing very different from what we have seen in other countries. However, in Italy's case, there is one important detail. Some of these parties were born there, in the aftermath of post-fascism, and although they no longer use such explicit symbols, their ideas are echoed by increasingly large sectors of the population. The official rhetoric has been marked by confrontation, promises of order, and attacks on supposed internal enemies: the press, immigrants, and civil movements. Small neo-fascist parties, once seen as marginal, have regained ground, and in some cases even respect, among more radical supporters. In 2018, a militant went out armed on the streets of Macerata and fired at African immigrants. The motivation? To retaliate for a crime. The country was in shock. Protests against the government have been met with repression, and even within the coalition there are rifts between moderates and more hardline wings. Polarization has taken over social media, the streets, and family conversations. Extremist groups have returned to marching, threatening journalists, and extolling the old order with dangerous nostalgia. Italian democracy remains standing. But in times like these, the risk is not collapse. It is slow, silent, and continuous erosion. Number 9. Freedom of the press and political violence. And finally, since we are talking about threats to journalists, it is time to delve into one of the most sensitive issues on Italy's dark side: freedom of the press. Generally, when we talk about lack of press freedom, our minds go straight to authoritarian countries such as North Korea, Turkmenistan, or post-Soviet dictatorships. Few people imagine that, in the heart of Western Europe, being a journalist can be dangerous. But the reality in Italy belies this idea. Italy is, unfortunately, the Western European country with the highest number of journalists living under threat. Hundreds of reporters work under constant pressure, and more than 200 live with permanent police protection because of their work. Many of these professionals have been threatened or persecuted after reporting crimes linked to the Mafia or extremist groups. One of the most high-profile cases in recent times was that of journalist Paolo Berizzi from the newspaper La Repubblica. After publishing reports on neo-fascist organizations, he began receiving death threats and became the first journalist in the country to receive an armed escort for political reasons, something previously reserved only for reporters covering the Mafia. In addition to physical violence, judicial intimidation is on the rise. The current Prime Minister has already sued several journalists for criticizing her stance and even filed a lawsuit against a reporter who made a joke about her height. There are also allegations of political interference in RAI, Italy's public television station, with attempts to censor and dismiss professionals for defamation. Organizations defending press freedom are sounding the alarm. The National Federation of the Italian Press has warned that the aggressive rhetoric of political leaders who are now calling journalists enemies is encouraging hatred against the press. In short, despite its image as a solid democracy, Italy faces a worrying scenario. Behind the headlines, there are reporters being silenced, watched, or persecuted. This reveals yet another dark side that the country needs to take seriously. Of course, Italy remains beautiful, rich in culture, and influential on the European stage. But to pretend that this is all there is to Italy is to turn a blind eye to a reality that cries out to be seen. If there is a dark side behind the Tower of Pisa and the Roman ruins, it is the one we have shown here. Italy is not just what you see on Instagram. It is also everything that almost no one talks about. And now that you know this other side, it's worth asking, does it still seem like such a perfect place? And that's it for today. So, did you already know about this lesser-known side of the country? Tell us what caught your attention the most in the comments. We want to hear your opinion. If you enjoy exploring the world from angles that almost no one shows, you know what to do. Keep following Bello Mundo, because we still have a long way to go, and a lot of truth that doesn't appear in tourist guides. See you next time.